say starting. And there we go. We are live. All right, everybody. So, you can, of course, hear me and not the guest as per usual to get started here. Today, we have Petrona and AWKWORD, 10 Demands for Justice, a group that has an awesome set of demands, a very informative website. Like, we're going to link to all the stuff that they want us to link to in the descriptions on the YouTube videos and all this afterward, but there's going to be a lot to cover here, and we're going to be talking about prison abolition, defunding the police, and all these other, well, I would say reform-based stuff, but reform is kind of, for me personally, we're well past that. So I want to have that big conversation with them here. So I'm going to bring them on, and here we go. There they are. All right. So how's it going, both of you? Everyone be nice. This is her first time on a show like this. Gotta call you out. Come on. You gotta start it off right. Get the smile going, you know? So, the audience here is always fun. You know, there'll be a few chatters as we get going here, but normally a lot of the views and whatnot happen on YouTube, as we kind of all understand. The chatters, you know, near the middle and end, we'll start taking questions from them, responding to what they have to say. I'm sure they'll have a lot of fun stuff to ask. They always do. So, first things first, what I would love is, whichever one of you wants to, I'm going to guess it's awkward here, to explain to the audience who and what 10 Demands for Justice is.
Okay. So in late May, Petrona and I and about 10 other people or so got together. We all knew each other from activist circles. I've been an abolitionist for over a decade and been in the criminal justice, racial and social justice activism space for 2 decades now. And, we decided, like you said in your intro, that reform doesn't work in any way other than to strengthen the system itself. And we also understood that it wasn't sufficient to simply vote for change or simply protest, but we would be a lot more effective as a community and as a movement if we really did the research. We communicated with all of the most heavily impacted groups. We included members of all of those groups and put together a really concrete set of demands that would not only take us to the point where we could completely abolish police and prisons, but actually lay the groundwork. So it's not as much a pie in the sky, demand singularly that we want this specific thing to happen overnight. But we start with defunding police. So this call that has become more and more popular over the last few months is our step one. As we defund, we reallocate those resources, and that's just one of the many laws and changes that we are looking to implement over time, so we can meanwhile build this alternative humanist abolitionist society that would actually be fit for not needing police and not needing prisons.
I'm there. What's your opinion on this? You joined up, Petrona. You're part of this whole thing. What do you think about the group itself and what it's going to accomplish here? What it's working on?
Well, what brought me on was definitely what happened to George Floyd, but it was a succession of events, starting with Arbery and other police brutality situations that were happening. Sorry. One moment. I'm on a call, sweetie.
No worries.
Sorry about that. I have little ones.
We're all at home and have kids and
Dude,
everything
I'm
else.
hiding.
Yes. So that was my driving force, really. I have kids. I'm black in this country. My husband is black. We have to have this conversation, which sucks. My children have never had any direct interactions with cops, but they are afraid of cops. I've had to have conversations with them about how to behave if you ever encounter cops or anything like that. And with the way the current climate is, I'm afraid when my husband steps out. I'm afraid when my brother steps out. So when it came time after George Floyd was murdered on camera and nothing happened, it was like nothing. It's you just watch the life being drained out of someone over a $20 bill. Why? It makes no sense. Life, there's no value to life, and people should not be treated that way. And these are the people we say are here to serve and protect us, but they don't do that at all. At all, they cause more harm than anything. So I was motivated to come in and find a way for us to bring about change, because I don't want my kids to have to deal with this. I don't want their kids to have to deal with this. And I think 10 Demand is amazing so far, what we're doing with the research involved, the people involved, and the plans that we have in the future. We understand this is something that will take time, but there are definitely things that we laid out that can happen right now, immediately, and that can start making a difference. And these are the things that I would like to see happen. They're small, but they are very impactful, and they really will build up on top of each other and lead us to where we finally want to be.
I love it. So, for the audience, there's 10forjustice.com, and there are 10 demands here, and they've got a bunch of, descriptive text. There's paragraphs. But I want to read out the demands for everyone, and then, we'll go through a few of them. We'll talk about some of it as the stream goes on. But this is to set the stage for full abolition. 1. Defund the police and reallocate resources to impacted communities. 2. Demilitarize the police. 3. Eliminate discriminatory policing, prosecution, and sentencing. 4. Institute complete law enforcement transparency and accountability. 5. Independently investigate all police crimes and abuses of power. 6. Install community representation, oversight, and safety measures. 7. End strategic counter-protest violence. 8. Apologize and provide reparations. 9. End the war on drugs. And 10. End carceral punishment. And, with that list right there, one of the things that really, made me happy about what you guys were working on is it's a lot more thought out than just the calls for defund the police. Like, that has to be up there at the top. It's got to be the beginning, because those funds need to be redirected. 1, just for all of our safety, but 2, to actually get any of these balls rolling, you need the money. And right now, with the militarization and everything else of the police, there's a lot of money being spent that doesn't have to be in that space. So what I like about 10 Demands is that it's very well thought out. And when you look at these paragraphs, you're going to find links to articles, to everything from the Washington Post to Medium articles by professors. When you go to the website, you're going to find a set of resources which explain to you, all of these theories, be it books, be it, even some videos. There's a lot of information here, and I want to make sure we kind of go through some of the more important pieces here. Although all of it is important, we do not have 20 hours here. I'm sure they will want to sleep at some point. So, you start right off with defund the police and reallocate resources to impacted communities. And one of the things I would love to know is, you start there, obviously, because that's, where money's available. I mean, we understand this. It's going to, take away their ability to, 1, do all the abuses they're doing, and 2, that's money that should be used for other things. So, I love that idea. And it comes across in how you've described everything, but There are a few cities now that have started the work in their city councils and whatnot of figuring out what defunding even looks like. Minneapolis has passed some, I want to say, half measures. I mean, they're not good. They're interesting starts that I didn't even think would happen. There are a few cities, like I believe there's one, it's in New Jersey, that have already actually defunded the police, and they did it like 10 years ago, like outside of this.
Yeah.
And so have you guys been looking at the historically defunding kind of movement that maybe wasn't organized like this, but some cities just did it? Was that part of your research here?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at that. We looked at other countries. We obviously spent a lot of time on the theory as well. But as you pointed out, most, especially in major cities, or larger cities, they're at best half measures. In New York City, many people celebrated a victory in defunding the NYPD, when merely what they did was they moved from the police budget to the school budget, school cops. They called them safety officers, but they're essentially militarizing the schools and putting, basically the school to prison pipeline, right there in front of all of us. So that's not defunding. That's just moving money around. Other cities have cut it by 5%. What we're looking to do, as it says, on the website, is to defund to zero. And like Petrona said, there are things we can do right now. We can implement a hiring freeze. We can implement we can end all bonuses. We can end all new investments in, training and facility renovations, get rid of the PR departments. When it comes to the police departments and the police officers themselves, we can start with 5%, but certainly we'd like to see it a lot larger than that. And every year defund more and more. And with that money, that's the big key that, you talked about, is those funds need to be reallocated to the communities that have been criminalized, that are being over-policed, and to the specific areas that are being ignored, like education, like substance abuse treatment, like jobs training, things like that.
So one of the big pieces of the platform then is, when you take this money away from the police, you have to put it into local community options. Now, this is an interesting one because here in my local community, there are, the local police force is, it's interesting. We find, like in Boston, when you look at the major cities and the acts of violence against people of color, immigrants and all of that, compared to population size, Boston is the lowest percent based on size there, and that would be great. You would think, wow, we're winning, right? But then you look at the number that's still happening being unbelievable, and it's like, if we're winning, that's really sad. It's not like a positive thing, but they are putting in some effort. And so I've been able to talk to a bunch of people related to that effort, and one of the more interesting things that I've heard that I would love to kind of hear an opinion on is this idea with the defund movement, which, again, please, for the love of God, defund. I'm 100% there. But of taking money from the police, putting it into more social care, like there's so many calls that cops go on that are better for a social services worker, a social worker, someone with even all the way up to, a psychology degree, depending on the varying nature of these calls. And one of the interesting things I was told by people who go on those calls now here, because some of that's in place here, but it's minor compared to what needs to be, is they still won't go if a cop won't go with them, because they never know how bad it's going to be when they walk into these situations where they need to go in and deal with, other humans who are having some kind of an issue. Be it, just something related to a neighbor, all the way up to a mental health breakdown. And And so in the end, they still, even though they're the ones we're looking to possibly get the funding to and the retraining to, they don't want to show up without a cop that's armed and ready to save their life if it goes wrong. How do we work that into it? Is that a training issue? Is that a what is that?
It's definitely a training issue. It's also a mindset issue. There's so much propaganda. Um, it's been built like cops are there to protect, they're there to serve, they're there to help, and that you need the security, that somebody's gonna be violent, and it's gonna be scary. There are ways that we can kind of retrain people to stop thinking that way. If you absolutely have to have a cop with you, maybe it's somebody that's not armed, no taser, no batons, no guns when they go there, because maybe it's a woman going, a female going,
Mm-hmm.
and they feel like they need some sort of protection. Maybe have firefighters go, have ambulance go, or maybe just cops that are unharmed. Because if you're answering a well check call, why should somebody be armed to go help somebody that's going through a mental health breakdown?
We've seen that go bad too many times. So I
Yes.
completely agree. I want to understand what kind of a solution gets us to where these people will feel comfortable going and doing the work that we need them to do. But at the same time, like you said, maybe it's someone smaller, someone small of stature who would feel very intimidated. Let's say the person they're going to this house is a big
Mhm.
6'5", man who works out at a gym. Like, you don't want to send a 5 foot tall person, who's 90 pounds to go
But
do a
at
well
the
check
same
on this
time,
person. So,
at the same time, there are really overweight cops. There are
oh yeah,
really,
I can
there are
outrun half
really
the cops on the staff here, and I've got a hurt knee.
there are really
Like,
small
yeah.
cops. I don't automatically assume a female cop or a transgender cop is not of equal strength as a man. But since
Oh
women
no.
were brought up, there are female cops too.
Mhm.
So that shouldn't matter. What first and foremost, like Petrona said, we need to unlearn everything that we've been taught about police and prisons. That does take time. As you mentioned, training to de-escalate is another part of it. Just because someone is a social worker or a psychologist doesn't automatically make them suitable for this type of situation.
Mhm.
And instead of patrols, as it was mentioned, we need wellness checks. So instead of this reactionary mechanism where 911 is called and cops show up in response and don't know how to handle it and escalate it and are responsible for 1/3 of all stranger murders in this country, we need regular wellness checks of people who are identified as needing that kind of service. So when instances occur where it is not amidst a wellness check and it has escalated, there are people who already know these people, who are already trained, who can come and address the situation.
And that's down to the idea of more local community support, building out in local instances. So when I was in Seattle for the CHOP/Chaz, the autonomous zone. As I went out, being from Occupy and all the other stuff that I did in my past, I wanted to see what they were doing and kind of see if they would make some bigger moves. They had space, they had time. The city hadn't moved in on them yet, and there were some organizational issues there, and so it went the way it went in the end. But in the conversations on the ground, what was really interesting to me is talking to the local city there. They were talking about, here's this giant police station in this area that has all this funding, and we need to take the funding from that, close that building down, and turn it into a community center. And then the other half of the crowd was saying, did you look around you and why we have any media coverage at all? If we were in the actual, and this was the language used, the black part of town and not the white part of town, no one would even be paying attention. We don't need this police station. We need a building in our community. And what was interesting is you started looking and you realized that like the area of town we were in was very much where like all the kids who worked at like VC funded startups, or like, you know, all the like coders from Amazon were and whatnot. And it was it was very much you know, fruit stands out on the street, kind of like there's a farmer's market every other day place. It wasn't really where most of the people who were outside at the Chaz actually lived. And they wanted that to be in their community. So here we were with some space in a building that we definitely couldn't. You're like, what's the point of putting a community center here to help these people? These aren't the people who need it.
Right. Well, they definitely didn't need a community center. Yeah, they definitely.
But what I wanted to say was, what was interesting that to me is they do. Like, everyone needs that. We need to make that for everyone, right? Like, we don't need that giant police station anymore.
Certainly, but the need for a community center in an area that has been ignored by our political leadership is more, as you know, is greater than right than, you know, where people have all this extra money to spend and they can do their little co-op, you know, office spaces.
Oh yeah,
like that's a far less, you know.
It was very gentrified. Where Chaz and Chop were was very gentrified.
But I think that's actually, this is slightly off topic, but I think that's actually a really positive thing, as they said, because it got the media coverage. It's also good to make rich people uncomfortable. Them being a little uneasy for a little bit, it pales in comparison to what it's like, as I understand, for people like Petrona and her family members every single day. So, you know, like William Upski Wimsatt wrote 2 books, No More Prisons and Bomb the Suburbs. Obviously, No More Prisons directly relates to the work that, you know, that we do. But his point in Bomb the Suburbs was, by the way, it doesn't mean drop a military weapon. Yeah. What he means is people are constantly doing graffiti in their own neighborhoods. They're looting their own neighborhoods. Do graffiti in the rich neighborhood. They're the ones who need to see what you're trying to say, and they're the ones whose property should be destroyed, not your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Bring it right to them. So, point 2 that you make, which you kind of touched on in the talk about defunding, was demilitarizing the police. Now, you do, again, this is why I want people to really check out the website, because it isn't just a paragraph describing, you know, what that might look like. It's a paragraph that specifically mentions the bill currently before the federal government that could be passed, the various grants that police are using to actually get this type of equipment, you know, by name, by number, by bill number. And that's, you know, important information to have so you can go find more and actually also push your congressman, your representative, anyone to help with this. So in it, you talk about, you know, disarming all law enforcement. And earlier in the conversation, we brought up the idea of, you know, these wellness checks was used as one of the terms, and that's a big part of this type of work that we're saying defund the police and put that money over there. So with the demilitarizing, you know, here, or I should say even out there, it was scary because they were bringing in like these giant tank-sized MRAD and LRAD devices, like that were ready to just like they were causing like us physical pain from a distance. And I'm sorry, but no local police force needs that.
Definitely not.
Right? So what is the plan forward? Like, what do these bills actually do?
All right. So there are a lot of different ways that local police departments, and we're not just talking about Seattle or New York City, you know, or Atlanta, tiny, small town police forces have tanks. They have these they're like the newer things are these like bulletproof robot killing machines, and the methods through which they're acquired is all through, you know, different parts of the federal government. So the Department of Homeland Security, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the FBI, the Justice Department, the Pentagon, and there are all of these grants, you know, that enable them to militarize. And this has been going on for really since the beginning of police and prisons post-slavery. The federal government incentivizes state and local governments to make mandatory minimum sentencing laws, anything to continue and expand the churn, and put more primarily Black poor people into prison to provide further profit for rural communities. So this is just one other part of that, is the militarization of these police departments, creating this environment of fear in these over-policed communities. It's in their schools. It's as soon as they walk out of their homes. And that's why throughout the country, people walk around with their phones in their hands, not because they're texting, but because they're ready to film. Ramsey Orta, who ended up being framed by the NYPD and almost killed, and incarcerated, and just got out a few months ago. The reason he was able to film Eric Garner's murder in Staten Island was because he had already learned that he needed to have his phone on him filming, because they had that many interactions with police. And when they're, carrying machine guns, it's even more dangerous, because they are not de-escalating. They are not fit and qualified to handle tense situations, and they're further empowered by these military grade weapons. In a small town in Connecticut, one of the first things I did after leaving college was I was a journalist, and still am, but I used my position at a newspaper to inform the public that this tiny little town's police department had this small little line item in their police commission, bill, or whatever you want to call it, to get AR-15s. Nobody knew about it. Nobody paid attention. Totally unnecessary. But thanks to me in this particular case, but thanks to journalists, this didn't happen, because there was an uproar. So this kind of uproar should be happening all over the country. But just like defunding, just like everything else, we understand that it's not an overnight thing. It's not immediate. So as we're defunding, we're demilitarizing. And that's why we say on the 10 demand site and in our demands, we're starting with military grade weaponry and equipment. Before we completely disarm and defund, we want to get rid of the things that are just clearly unnecessary.
So the thing that I find interesting there is you talked about not doing it all in one fell swoop, right? Like, it's stages. And to me, I think that's really important for people to understand, because and it's all really touchy subjects, right? Like, all of this is really, like, people have strong opinions. But we do have a school to prison pipeline, and we have people growing up in ways that are pushing them towards crime. I mean, there are 100 ways you can help out in communities that would stop 1 million people from ever actually committing a crime in the first place. A lot of crimes are crimes related to personal needs, personal food, feeding my people, and that whole kind of that whole type of crime is just it's built in because of the way our communities are policed, the way they are built out. So if you just straight demilitarize and then also remove all weaponry from the people who are supposed to stop that, but don't then fix that at the same time, then it is chaos, right? And so we've got to do this in stages. Now, with these stages, again, I love you guys' website. It's really built out. Just like the order is really smooth, the transitions, because you get down to the next thing is ending the discriminatory policing and prosecution and sentencing, which would help to slow down that pipeline and would really start to get us down the path where less of that type of police work is. Where it's less defensible, right? Like right now, they say it's necessary because of the conditions that they have put in place. It's not like we did this. Definitely. And I want to touch on early policing. For a lot of the people out there who don't understand this, who might watch this, policing as we know it today didn't really exist. Like, when you watch some, film or movie that claims to be historically correct but shows a time period like before the late 1500s, late 1600s, in that range, and then shows cops like we have today, that's not how it was. They didn't exist. Policing showed up in its current form all its names and its ways, honestly, to deal with slaves. And it was built up by groups of racists as roving gangs to deal with runaway slaves, to deal with bringing them back. And so at its core, policing as we understand it, and what we're referring to when we say cops, all started on a foundation of racism. And so I wanted people to kind of understand that, like, you'll watch some, I don't know, something about ancient China, and it'll be like about the 1200s, and this dynasty, and they'll have cops running around acting like they're bobbies, and in current England with their batons twirling. And you're like, they didn't have those. That's not a thing. This is modern. We did this as a modern society. And it's important, I think, for everyone to understand that. Like, that just blows my mind that, like, this was not necessary for us to get to modern society, and it is not necessary in modern society. It started out as racism. It started out for profit. I mean, again, slavery. That was not just racism. That was for profit. That was like, let's say just racism. That's a horrible term. But you know what I mean. It was a profitable venture for these people. And it still is. The reason we have a school to prison pipeline is because it's profitable. There is a lot of money being made on defense contractors selling military equipment to police, on the various revolving doors in government positions that end up working for those companies after regulating those companies and giving them their contracts and their bids and their deals. And then there's also the prison industrial complex where they are literally for profit incarceration, and they want more people incarcerated. So there's I could keep going because this is such a big issue. Like,
Yes.
there's so many pieces to it. But in the end, the beginning of this whole thing was racism and profit. And today, hundreds of years later, what do we have? Racism and profit.
Yeah.
That's 300 years of this, and we need to do something about it now. Do we think we are in the generation that gets to start actually solving this? How confident are you in what you're doing and the people you're talking to?
Petrona, what do you think? Are we going to do it?
It feels like it's a do or die thing. We must do something. We cannot just sit and watch. Something has to be done. But I won't lie to you. There are moments where it feels like, what's the point? Will this really have an impact? Will something come out of it? Especially for me, because it takes away time from me and my kids. And for all of us involved, the research involved, getting it together, promoting it, all of it, educating people on it, helping people unlearn certain things to change their mindset, reconnect with their humanity regarding others. Um, but I think it can happen because more people are talking about it. Um, it's very blatant now how bad it is. You can't escape how bad it is because of technology. So
Mm-hmm.
that helps. We just have to keep it, like, keep
We have
pushing
to keep the
and take
pressure up.
advantage of it.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Where it gets scary is when you see something happen like a kinder a 6-year-old kid being arrested because they threw a tantrum, and then you look at the comments and you see on Twitter people saying, "Oh, you didn't that kid wasn't raised right. No 6-year-old would do this. It doesn't matter that they had sleep apnea." And it's like, okay, yes, a 6-year-old should not be kicking a teacher. They know better. But it's still a kid, and it's a kid with debilitating issues that causes them to be angry or cause tantrum. Why isn't a teacher able to handle that? Why
Let
are
me
you in the
say,
profession?
my daughter, who's Dominican and Jewish, punched a teacher in the face at around that age. If she were, she looks more like me. If she looked more like Petrona, and if she weren't at a school for messed up children like mine, she might she might have been right in the school to prison pipeline. She might have already been halfway there. Um, so it is absurd to assume that this is not something that a normal 6-year-old or whatever would do. Everyone is different. Everyone has
Mhm.
different psychological factors, environmental factors, all the things that Petrona brought up, about the societal impact. And my daughter is a functioning 16-year-old now. But believe me, if she were in a juvenile detention center by 13, she would not be functional.
Mhm.
She would be heading to an adult facility like most people who get sent to juvenile detention. One of the parts of the 10 demands is eliminating the prison industrial complex. That you mentioned that for-profit part, which by the way includes not just for-profit prisons, but state and federal prisons that use prison labor, new slavery, at 5 cents, 10 cents an hour, to do manual labor, like making hand sanitizer for us during COVID while they're in the most dangerous places in the entire world. Um, and even the companies that profit off of the food, Sodexo, Marriott, and other companies that make food for colleges and for prisons. The companies that provide the clothing, the bedding, etc. But when it comes to the school to prison pipeline, there are so many things that we could do right away, like repealing truancy laws, simply removing police and surveillance technology and metal detectors from schools. The school's zero tolerance, disciplinary policies and suspensions and expulsions and the truancy laws, all of these things, just like everything else we're going to talk about and have talked about, predominantly impact certain people, poor people of color. These laws and policies exist everywhere. They're just not applied equally. It's
No,
like,
they're not.
um, so so lastly, the last part of your question, as it relates to our confidence, or we've definitely, like Petrona said, we've been up and down, and like what kind of effect we're having, what kind of effect we're going to have. When two more Black people were murdered by cops in the last week and a half, both
Mhm.
shot in the back, neither guilty of anything. Knowing a lot of people who are in and out of prison, it is trying, right? Like, we, as Petrona said, we're trying to help people unlearn everything they've been told since the day they were born. But I think, I stay confident because I've never heard so much chatter about defund the police in the mainstream media for, like, big liberal politicians to even be talking about it means that we're doing something right. And one thing we haven't even mentioned before is that we are working on an open letter and using a Twitter. I'm sorry, not a Twitter, a text bot that was used a lot for causes around the elections and things like that. Petrona found this for us, and we've been talking for a while about actually getting these demands and the justification around it in the hands of all elected officials at the state, local, federal level for a long time. But with this tool, we're going to be able to do it soon, and it's going to be easy for people to add their names and literally through their phones email all of the different levels of people who supposedly represent them. So if they're not talking about it now, they're going to have to soon.
So that leads actually into, someone in chat was just talking about the fact that down in Florida there are actual judges and lawyers who work for the state that also own parts, be it stock in or anything else in the private prison industry.
Right.
And we've seen a few cases of that where judges have actually finally gotten in trouble for actively pushing people into the into that pipeline in a way where it was so blatant that they had to be stopped. Now, I don't think they were stopped because the system cared. I think they were stopped because other judges were like, "You're hurting my game," and that's a whole sad other state of things. But with the technology you're talking about, we could put these names out there as people who are doing this specifically and say, you need to talk to your local representatives about this person.
Well, I mean, yes, I'm sure it could be used for that. Ours is going to be more specific to our 10 demands and what they can implement at their various levels of government. But we do have specifically...
So pushing out like policy, like templates?
Sure. More like policy, more like like sending letters with the demands as an attachment that you need to look at this because this is what your constituency wants. And you may think it's radical, but it's not radical anymore. And these are specific things that can be done now that will help create this society where it's not going to seem so crazy to abolish it. If we live in a humanist society where we are actually practicing reparative, transformative justice and performing mediation where everyone benefits, we won't need this justice system that exists today to criminalize and incarcerate. But in regard to what you were saying, like we do have specific line items where we address like limiting prosecutorial discretion,
Yes.
ending prosecutor immunity, immediately removing law and oath-breaking judges, and documenting and publicly reporting racial and economic disparities on a court-by-court and judge-by-judge basis. So, we're not lawmakers. We don't, and, I'm sure Petrona and I would be happy if they wanted to call us in and help them develop these specific plans. But what we're saying is, this is what you need to do. The details about how it's done, we don't go into that on the 10 demands, but we have ideas. We've discussed these things. These are things that need to be done though, so that it's clear to the public, more so even than it is today, what is going on. And like you said, who's doing it? These judges should not be in control of people's destinies. And these prosecutors should not have this discretion. And these 3 strikes and other mandatory minimum laws shouldn't exist. There's so many different levels set up to send certain people that have been targeted from the moment they were born to a prison.
So you're absolutely on point there. We need the overarching kind of ideals set out and laid out in a way that people can understand. What I'm thinking about right now that is interesting in my head, at least, is being a local activist and doing a lot of local stuff, but also doing quite a lot of international stuff. On the local side of things, local a lot of times is just so busy with even trying to live, let alone dealing with, any of their policymakers or their representatives in government here. When I've watched them go in front of local government, it's always been far easier for them when they brought well thought out policy work to those representatives' aides to go through, and so the representative themselves didn't have to come up with it all on their own, because it also ensured that what the community actually wanted went into it, instead of just the title being what we wanted and then the body of it still, like we had said earlier with the police reform that really didn't reform, it just moved the money somewhere else, right? Yeah. So I would love to see some kind of a resource out there that actually had at least templated structures of like, here's the policy for removing these types of policing, here's the policy for moving this money into that. And I know on a jurisdictional basis, every city, county, state is different. But just some basic structure that locals could use would really speed this along. I'm wondering if someone has that out there yet.
Probably.
Yeah.
What about Austin? They have something going on right now. They did defund the police. It was done locally. It was pretty big. The thing with what we're asking for, none of this is new. It's not like there isn't a format out there for them to follow and implement or stuff and replicate and have as laws. Um, so we don't need to hold their hands. They're paid to do this. It's a must. So what we ask for are pretty simple, and we break down each demand so
Yep.
much that they have enough guidance to do something. And without us or any other person food feeding to them what they need to do, it's out there. They are getting paid for that. And if they feel they're not getting paid enough for that, they better defund the police and get some of that money to them to do the work that
Right
is needed.
there.
Well,
So yes,
Well,
that makes some sense. I'll do some research on that and see if I can find anything based on kind of what I was saying there. But yeah, the demands are amazing. The one thing that another piece that I really love about your site is the links to all the books that really talk
Right.
about this stuff. Now,
on
I
that
want
note, if you find anything,
yeah,
that is-
I will share it with you.
yeah, because
Absolutely.
we're not. There's
We're
no
huge.
ego. Like our site, 99.9% of the resource section is other people who know
Yep.
more than us, who've done this longer than us, better writers than us, whatever it may be. Like Petrona said, this is a long time coming. It's been in the works a long time. It's been led by Black feminists. There's a lot of writings, and it's all on our site.
So I want to talk a little about prison. Obviously, we've touched on it through some of the for-profit stuff, but I do love verso books, by the way. So mentioned in the chat there. But yes, one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about in relation to prisons is, and I want your opinions on this one. I find myself in that weird position of very much knowing my white male privilege, right? But also having been straight through that pipeline all the way to the point where I ended up in maximum security prison. And, sitting there in prison, I learned a lot from the people inside, because there were people there who were just there for life. I interacted with everyone from someone who was literally on their last month and heading out to people who weren't going to get out. And there were a lot of people in that system who had come out and gone back in a few times because they, in their own minds, I would say, I don't want to say this is a real thing, but it is, because it's in their heads and perception is reality, right? But in their own heads, they belonged there now. They had been institutionalized in a way where the outside world didn't work for them anymore. And having known a couple of them that then came out, and after all probationary periods and all the other legal stuff was over, we talked a few times. They were right. They were failing and struggling really bad out here. After one of them was 25 years in, and he did what it took to get back. And so if we're going to get rid of prisons, if we're going to start mass releasing, let's go for, of course, nonviolence, ending the war on drugs, and getting all of them out. There's kind of an order here that gets us the easiest out first, and then slowly we work down to the people that maybe we still need some solution for. We're not putting serial killers back out on the street, right? But there's got to be a place. And I'm wondering, in your thoughts about abolition of prisons, what do you do about the people who are currently just so institutionalized that they don't even want out?
Well, I like that framing of the question more than the one we always get, which is, what about the rapists and murderers? Simply. Yeah. I'll first say that I think, very few, if not no people are incapable of being healed. And I also want to start by saying that and actually you made the argument yourself that what prisons currently do doesn't work. If we're
Exactly.
pretending
There was no
that,
rehabilitation where I was. None.
correct. And so, penitentiaries were first built for rehabilitation and or penitence. And as soon as, if not earlier, but it became crystal clear what prisons were for when they made it so that Pell Grants could no longer be used for people who are incarcerated, to get their education. So, as you pointed out, we are starting in our plan with nonviolent offenders, so to speak, clearly undocumented immigrants, people who've been criminalized simply because they weren't born here, those who are in prison because of a bail or parole violation, political prisoners, clearly those who are there because of their political beliefs, because they scare the power structure, and those who are elderly, disabled, and immunocompromised, and all of that. However, the amount of serial killers is like less than 1% of the people who commit crimes and less than 1% of the people who are in prison. The vast majority of people who are in prison are there for nonviolent offenses, most drug related, predominantly because of their race or how much money they lack. So if you talk about, the people who were so institutionalized, like I said, I like that question. It's a little different from what I usually hear. I know a ton of people who are at Greenhaven Maximum Security Prison in Stormville, New York, and a number of them have come out and now live what Whitey would call a very productive life. A lot of them are criminal justice activists themselves. My friend Angel, for instance, who worked with Just Leadership for a while. Lewis Reed, who he's not from Greenhaven, but he was also incarcerated and is now one of the leaders at Cut 50. One of the reasons that it's so hard for people who have been incarcerated for a long time to be successful when they get out is because there are very few programs set up to help them. There are some that exist, but they're created by formerly incarcerated people with, very little funding. When we defund police departments, we can put some of the money into helping those to prevent recidivism, along with all of these other social programs that we've talked about. So that's a big part of it. Kind of ending this stigma with incarceration, or being more stringent on how we kind of monitor businesses that don't hire people with a conviction, people who either don't hire people of color or hire them at like 40% of what they pay white people. And then obviously what happens in prison. We want to get rid of prisons entirely, but just like every other part of this, there is a time period where a lot is happening to enable this complete closure of prisons. Closing private prisons, that has to happen right away. Ending,
Step one.
Right, exactly. Ending private public partnerships for state and federal prisons, that can happen right away. Changing the 13th Amendment, banning solitary confinement, abolishing the death penalty. But when it comes to just opening the prison doors, a lot has to happen. So these programs on the outside, and then shifting what is happening in prisons in the meantime, they should be there for rehabilitation. They should be getting job training. They should be getting education. None of that is happening right now. So of course there are a lot of people who are made to be more effective criminals, or, people who are going to do what they can, like you said, to intentionally go back because they don't know how to function 25 years later in this society on the outside.
So more the Scandinavian, the Finnish model, where it's true rehabilitation. I mean,
As
there,
long as we have prisons, yeah,
there are Finnish prisons where you go into your cell with the door left open. It's got a flat screen on the wall and a PlayStation. Like,
totally.
and you go to school during the day, learning something new to do when you get out. Like, it's not, it's a unbelievably different world, and that's down to the social safety net and the kind of social contract actually being upheld. In the chat, which you guys don't see on Zoom there, but people have brought up UBI as one of the pieces of the puzzle, removing some of the strain on people, and I would say UBI, Medicare for All are two of the big pieces to removing a lot of the stress that leads to crime. But something you touched upon that was interesting to me in my time inside was everyone had kind of accepted the place in life they had been. I only met a couple people who absolutely said, F this, I don't deserve this, and I'm innocent. They were there, but like there's definitely a joke in movies and TV where everyone in prison is innocent. They all act that way. They didn't. A lot of the people inside totally accepted what they had done. But what was interesting about it to me was and the guards couldn't care less. They would sit around when they had open time, and they would talk about what they were doing when they got back out, because it was going to be the same thing that they were doing beforehand. But I once sat in on a circle where a bunch of, I would say at this point, kind of petty thieves. It's not like they were knocking off like, big jewelry heists with $50,000 diamonds. But they also weren't just knocking off someone's house. Like, they were doing, crime, like real robberies and burglaries and whatnot. And they sat around talking about how each of them got caught in great detail to teach the others how not to get caught that way. So when they all got out, they could go right back to it. And I'm laughing because it was funny in the moment sitting in that circle with these people. But at the same time, it was sad because you could tell that they knew there wasn't another answer for them when they came out. And I was the only actual white person sitting in that circle. And it's mostly because I didn't actually choose a side while I was in. A lot of people chose their sides, and I got away with a little due to what someone else said in the chat was torturous conditions. I was in solitary in the hole for my first 27 days in with no light or anything. So it was utterly torturous. I was hallucinating. I was seeing things. I had no blanket. I had no pillow. I was just in a little 8x8 concrete box. And
that is literal torture.
That's inhumane.
After about 2 weeks, you start to actually see things. Your brain starts to make people up in the room with you. I started having conversations with people who weren't there. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, as long as you're not in there for, say, another 4 or 5 months, you get past it. It was a thing that happened. It doesn't become permanent. But another few months of that, and it would have. So I got a little bit of a pass when I was put out into General Pop afterward. They weren't that pushy with me about, to be blunt about it, joining one of the prison gangs. They were more like, leave him alone for a little bit. None of you would have made it out of that box. Like, that was the attitude, And so I got lucky there a little. But, I was the only white person in that circle when we were talking about that stuff. And this is where I really realized my serious white privilege, right? I got out, and they you just walk out the front door, and you better have a friend ready to come pick you up, or like a taxi or something, like when you get out of these prisons usually. So I walk out the front door of prison on the day that I'm released, and I go home. And the thing is, you show up at your probation officer the next morning, but you better be there at 7. And I get there, and again, I'm the only white guy basically sitting outside of this probation officer's office, and people are getting yelled at. You can see them leaving upset. They're talking about job prospects. They're talking about what they're going to do, and half of them are honestly lying to her because they don't think they have prospects. She is talking to them about, what programs exist. And I'm hearing all of this because the doors are thin, and there's the gap under the door, too. I'm just like, I can hear it all. I'm sitting right next to this door. And it is it is really sad because I can tell they're not going to get any help. Like, none of this is helpful. Half of them are going back in. There's nothing here that's going to get them a job in the next few days. They've got to eat somehow in the next few days. 2 of them came out and said, none of my family's left alive. My one friend moved away, and I don't have a roof over my head tonight. What are you going to do? And they were told to go to the homeless shelter. And that's a whole nother pipeline of problems for that person now. Mm-hmm. And I walk in the door, and I get to explain to her that I've been out for a few hours. I already found a job, and I walk in as well, and I mean, I could hear her voice from the outside. It was a completely different person when she saw me walk in the door. And I sat down, and she treated me like a family member. Like, it was like, oh, thank God you're here. And that, you know, before that, growing up in Texas, especially with a bunch of Republicans around me, like, I hadn't understood what that white privilege really was. But, like, sitting in that room with her, I realized, like, the others got the treatment they got because they didn't look like that. And by the end of that first meeting, I had no observation needed. Everyone else was told, you're going to come in once a week. We're going to talk. We're going to do this. And I walked out with, give me a call if you need any help, but I don't need to see you every week. I'll phone call you once every 2 weeks and check in. And nobody else, surprisingly, all the people of color, were given that option in any way. And a couple of them, I got to say, I mean, I have no schooling. I have no degrees. My job prospects are simply because I'm pretty good at computers. And there were a couple kids there who were way more intelligent, way more educated than me, that would have done fine if they had been given that opportunity. And that says it was all. Crazy.
Yeah, the amount of people who are in prison for parole violations because they are not given that leeway that you were given. Yeah. You know, because they're harassed and, you know, they're looking to send them back. Yeah. You know, and at the beginning of the 10 Demands song that we created, I quote an abolitionist named Angela Parker, and she says, you know, I'm not directly quoting, but essentially like that we need to stop looking at certain people as animals, you know, as the devil. Like, you know, they looked at you as like, why are you here? And they looked at these people as like, why are they out? You know, and, you know, that is a major thing that like dates back to slavery when policing started and when they needed to find this new way to continue to make this profit once slavery was no longer officially legal. And that's why it's written into the 13th Amendment. You know, it's pretty incredible. I mean, like, ending systemic racism may even be easier than ending the day-to-day interpersonal racism. It is so deeply ingrained in this disgusting country we live in that, you know, more than like 50% of whom voted for Donald Trump, who calls Nazis very fine people. And then knowing that our other option was someone who was a segregationist, who wrote the crime bill. Like, I mean, that's our country, right? And, you know, I think the more we hold the power holders accountable through demands like these, through sustained protests, through things like general strikes, and by electing the few and far between progressives like Cori Bush, the closer we're going to get to making real substantive systemic change. How we can change the mindsets of all these people who for generations after generations were raised to believe certain people were lesser than them. I don't know how we're going to do that. The only way really is to experience it. I mean, you know, poverty is criminalized in this country too. You know, the street crime, like the street economy, homelessness, these are all, you know, things that send people to prison no matter what color you are. And it might take being there alongside a person of color to realize, like, what makes you better just because your skin color is like you have less melanin. I mean, it's that I, you know, that part I have no confidence in.
The
I'm a
science
lot
sell
more
is a hard
confident
one.
about the work we're doing.
Yeah, so the science sell is a hard one, right? Especially with like my family, you know, the religion kicks in, and they're like, "Well, we don't believe in that evolutionary stuff. That's just a theory." And then you try and explain to them that a theory is what's on the other side of a hypothesis, which I think is what you meant, and they're like, "What?" So you know, you lose them at that point. But yeah, you were gonna say something, Petrona?
Yes, I mean all of this is just we're not seen as humans. Um and that's one thing we have to humanize the system. Um when you were talking about recidivism, when you have somebody in jail and they don't think they can go live outside, it's because of the way they are treated in jail. They're not treated as human. Yes, you commit a crime and it's you go to jail for punishment, um, not for rehabilitation, not to address what caused you to commit a crime to begin with. And when you go out there, you don't go out there change. You went to jail for committing a crime, but what ends up happening, you more primed to commit the crime again, because when you were in there, you were mistreated. You were treated like an animal. You were treated less than. Um, your issues were not dealt with. You were not shown a better way. Um, and the environment there is just, it's not human. It's not friendly at all. Um, and you go out into the world and it's a mean world. Imagine if you've been in and out of this system and you're black, you're from a poor neighborhood, you're in a neighborhood highly patrolled by cops. If there's 100,000 cops in a neighborhood of 50,000 people, guess what? You're always gonna find crime. You're always gonna find something to arrest somebody for.
Right.
And there's always gonna be people going in and out of jail. And if you have that trauma day in and day out, you really do start thinking that you deserve this, you are less than, you cannot function better. And that's what we need to change. um,
Yeah.
People need to be able to go to school, people need to be able to eat, people need to be able to have housing. Their needs need to be met, and they have to have the option for something better. And yes, and if they don't have that, it's going to continue and we can change it. That's the thing. We can change all that. We may not be able to change people, racist people or any of that, but we can change how the system helps. And we're not supposed to handle people, we're supposed to help people, we're supposed to be human, give each other grace. Why did you commit a crime? Why did you steal this? What's the cause of it? What's the root of it? If we can take care of that, then somebody, I mean, until we get to the point where there's no jail, somebody that goes to jail um, will go and come back out, changed, rehabilitated, ready to do better, believing that they can do better, that they are worth a second chance.
Yep.
Um, but
I
And then
agree
it's not
entirely.
set up for that right now.
on top of that, like, you know, it's not even necessarily, I mean, it's not true that people of color or poor people necessarily commit more crimes
Not
either,
at all.
No,
right?
no.
They are
They
over
get prosecuted more.
Right. They get policed more and prosecuted more and sentenced to longer terms. You know, cocaine versus crack is the best example. Maybe 10 years ago or something, maybe 15 years ago, whatever it was, the law changed so that the sentence for crack cocaine was only 20 times worse for powder cocaine. That's insane. That's the better version.
Yeah.
For decades before that, it was 100 times worse. The only reason being who was doing powder cocaine versus who was doing crack cocaine.
Yeah, it was racist
No,
policy.
right. So if we change the racist policy, if we change the classist policy, 7 out of 10 people who are in jail currently in this country have not been convicted of a crime. They are in jail because they can't afford to get out. ending cash bail. There are so many things that we can do right now that would equalize the playing field. And, you know, all of these things, like I said, can happen now. And as we're defunding the police and reallocating those resources to helping the people who are believing that they are animals, who are given so many fewer opportunities, it kind of starts to build to this crescendo or place where these more ultimate goals of ours are far more feasible.
It gives
100% agreed.
people, yeah, sorry about that. It gives people time to change their mindset and learn that it is possible to live and have all of this work totally differently. And one thing I like to tell people, this was man-made. It's not set in stone. We didn't come here and find this already set up and we have no choice and no way to change it. We control how the system is. Men created it. If we can create it, we can undo it and do something better. We
Right.
can stop
Absolutely.
limiting yourself to what this is right now because it's not working. You're not affected by it doesn't mean that it needs to stay this way because there are people dying. There are people whose life end up having no meaning. We have a government robbing kids of parents. We have government robbing kids of their lives. And we're paying for that. Our taxes are funding that. How can you be okay with this? You can
You
demand
shouldn't be.
better.
That's
Better
where I like to point
exists.
out the historical nature of it. That this is not something that humans required for millennia. It's brand new compared to how old of a species we are, and how long we've been doing our versions of society. So like it is absolutely changeable. In the chat, one of my good old friends, Sanatomi, has asked. He wants to know your opinion, Petrona, on the case of Anjanette Young in Chicago. And this is, I'm sure you've heard of this case, but for the people watching, this is a case where, again, the police raid the wrong home.
Yes.
And so, can you speak to that a little?
Yes, definitely. Due diligence. Yeah, like you got the information. Can you look up who lives at that address? It's out there. It's available. It's available in government system. And do you need to go in the way you went in? Do you need to break down her door? Can we knock first? Can we deal with another human? You're not dealing with a beast. It's not a monster. You're not going in there slaying dragons. Can you knock? Say this is the police. Hear somebody answer. Ask somebody to identify themselves. And then can you treat them like a human being? You have a naked woman right there. Let her at least put some clothes on. If you must, cover them up and then go check in the other room to see if there's anybody there. If you're afraid that she's gonna do something or get somebody to come out that's gonna hurt all 15 of you, go check another room. Tell her to go put some clothes on. Ask for identification. All of this was such a gross abuse of power. These people cause more harm. Protect and serve. Is that what you were doing? Who were you protecting? Who were you serving? This is like you've caused somebody so much trauma, and all it would have taken was due diligence. The next apartment over, you got the wrong address. The wrong address. And had a doctor done something like that, gone into the left side of the heart instead of the right side of the heart, would they still be a doctor? Would they
No.
still have a job?
No.
Right. Great question.
How is that acceptable?
It's not.
They are not doing their job right, and they're not facing any consequences. No other place.
Right.
Not even at a call center. I've worked at a call center. Can you do a big mistake and where it's acceptable
How
and
about-
not face any consequences?
Other than like, even hitting a baseball, that's like the hardest thing in the world to do, apparently. You probably don't have a job if you hit 200. Cops solve 2% of major crimes. When they're not killing people or harassing people, beating people, they're also terribly unsuccessful at doing their job, which, people say protect and serve, right? They are almost never there to prevent crime. Virtually never. They're there, of course, to solve crimes that have already happened, and they can't even do that.
And let's be realistic. They can't prevent crime. Their job is not to prevent crime. It's very hard to do that.
Their job is to assign blame.
Yes.
Yes, but it's hard to ask somebody to prevent a crime from happening. You'd have to be able to go into somebody's mind. There are things that, like, if it's a big heist, if it's a big murder that's being planned, some terrorist act, those you might be able to prevent if you find the intelligence for it. But daily crime is hard to prevent. Somebody stealing because they don't have money, they don't have food, there's no job opportunities, they don't have somewhere to live. Those crimes, you can't prevent them. Let's talk about rape, for example. It's hard to prevent a rape unless a cop is right there, see it's about to happen, and then they don't solve those at all. They don't solve these cases. First of all, rape is underreported to begin with, because you, as a woman, you can't even trust a cop to solve it, to believe you, and it's such a traumatic event to relive. You can't talk about it. So what are they doing? What's their purpose?
Those that are reported stay, and where they do the rape kits, those never see the light of day.
They don't get tested. We find out that there's thousands of them sitting in evidence rooms.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Those women who do, or victims of abuse or rape, who do eventually, fight back against their attacker, these are criminalized survivors. They're the ones who end up in prison for defending themselves. And then you have, of course, the fact that 4 out of 10 police admitted to abusing their spouses. I would have to think, since 4 out of 10 admitted to it, it's probably closer to 7 out of 10. I mean, just like 1/3 of stranger murders are committed by cops, it seems like they're doing a lot of the abusing as well. These are clearly people who are in positions of power because they want these positions of power, or are in positions where they don't have any alternative employment opportunities. They should not have this type of power. They've proven that time and time again.
The hiring practices really select for that type of person on purpose. They want to keep their own around them. It makes them feel comfortable, I think, and it's just absolutely horrible. So that's another piece of the puzzle, is, of course, changing all the hiring practices, which some of the stuff on your website and everything kind of talks about.
I say there's no problem there. No more hiring.
Right. Freeze hiring is what you guys talk about. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, one, Zany, I want to say that is absolutely horrible. You guys can't see the chat, but talking about like what's going on here, and I hope you're in a much better place now than all of that. But you are right. Cops absolutely are just the most abusive people that there could possibly be out there as a group, and I think they select each other on purpose when they're hiring. So, at this point, what I like to do now that we're past an hour and we've kind of been talking a lot is I again want to remind people 10for justice. Hello there. 10forjustice.com. I always like to check and, make sure I'm saying the right one. And I want to make an ask, does the chat have any other questions they want us to talk about? Anything we haven't covered that you think we should mention on stream here while we've got them? It's the same as if I ask either of you this too. I'm totally putting them on the spot. So like sometimes it takes a sec for them to give us anything. But well, thanks, Doctor Avonway there, saying the interview's been really good. You guys are great. This has been fun. I know this is your first time doing something like this, but you're crushing it. This you need to do a lot more of these.
Yeah. Seconded.
Yeah, so that is the absolute biggest ask, right? So Doxy in the chat, who is absolutely amazing, has asked specifically, did you already tell us what you need from us? What can the audience watching this do to help 10 Demands for Justice get things done? What do you need from the public?
That's a great
all
question.
Activism needs things. So like what can we do to help?
Well, we really appreciate that that question. We do have the easiest thing you could possibly do is sign the petition on the website. But obviously, spreading the information that is on the website is more valuable, I think. The more people understand what abolition really is. Abolition is about presence, not absence. It's not about removing these institutions that we hold so dear. It's more about creating a more humanist society that enables us to no longer have these systems of oppression. And between all of our demands themselves, our How It Works page, and the myriad resources from other people, there is a lot to go through, and I believe it will convince just about anyone of why we're demanding these things, and also how possible it really is, especially when you take the measured road that we provide through the 10 demands. Of course, we also mentioned this great open letter concept that, we now have this mechanism for this technological mechanisms. We'll be able to send it to you. You'll be able to send it to your elected officials through your phones. So follow us on Twitter. It's TENDEMANDS. Or just keep checking the website. But it's easier to follow us on Twitter, and we'll update you. We should have that available soon. And to me, that's the number one thing that you can do when it's available, is help us put these demands in front of the people who are supposed to represent us, so that they know it's not just Petrona and me, but there are a lot of people who agree with us.
Yes, and if I can add and really
Please.
stress this, is that go over the website, read about it, and talk to people. Um, Whatever you learn from spending this hour with us, talk to people about it. It's not scary when people think about what happens to a society with no jails, what happens to a society with no cops. Well, guess what? It's gonna be better, because as you can see, cops cause more harm. We need better system. Tell people, when you defund the police, it's not done to hurt the community. It's not done to make these people better than other people. It's actually just to even the playing field, to just see humans as human, treat humans as humans. And if somebody commits a crime, why? It's like, did somebody make a mistake? If you have a kid that makes a mistake, you don't write them off. You try to teach them better. What can you do to help somebody? And if we start seeing each other as human, treating each other as human, and not just right like animals, it's gonna be better, and make it less scary. It's not such a scary thing. Even myself, when we first started 10 demands, it wasn't for us to go to abolition. It changed as we did more research, as we put the demands together. It changed where we are at this point, the road to abolition. It won't happen overnight. We're not asking for any of this to happen overnight. It's unrealistic, but the bare minimum can happen right now. And those we should have these conversations and help people be more comfortable with these ideas, that this is not right to put people in jail just because they cannot pay bail. It's not right to put people in jail because they have drug addiction. This is something that could be treated in a rehabilitation center, in a medical facility. There are other options. It's Cops are not required. If people can shift their mindset to reimagine something better, and you can help them get to that, that would go a long way into making 10 for justice much more possible to become a reality.
So I always like talking, especially when we have such a big, cause here, because there's so many facets to this cause. There's the very beginning, which I think does start with the simplest, lowest hanging fruit, is ending cash bail, right? You can work on that at the municipal level, at your local level, and fight for that one now. And there's people in most major cities already starting that fight. Some cities have already started passing it. So like that's the low hanging fruit that I think will get a lot more people interested in the rest of the path. So like for me, when both of you kind of mentioned the basics, like that is one of those first steps I can tell people. Talk to your local representatives, your state reps, your mayors, all these people have phone numbers, they have email addresses, they have office hours. Like, talk to them about step one. What do you think for your area is step one? Obviously, all the rest of the steps involve defunding police, taking that money, building out solutions, because you don't want to take away the ability for the police to do something with all these people who have addictions, but then also not have anywhere for them to go. That's a recipe for disaster for everyone on all sides of this, but at the same time, you don't want the cops involved. So, we need to take some of that funding and get it as quickly as possible into rehabilitation centers, into addiction recovery centers. Like here in my hometown of Malden, which is just north of Boston, we have a real amazing group called Malden Overcoming Addiction. And they work with the city, they work with the police, they work with everyone involved to help on not only local policy, but they even work really heavily with the local police, knowing that we're just not in a situation where the defunding has happened yet. And the police now know in a lot of situations where they would normally just take someone, throw them in a cell, and start them down the process, to call Malden Overcoming Addiction and start working through what other options are there out there that we can work with. And that's literally been just a small team of people. There were 5 people really behind getting this going in our local town. And we're years into it now. We're a few years in, but hundreds of people have been kept out of the prison system and gone down the recovery route through this effort. And they didn't have any laws passed to make them exist. They literally started a nonprofit, found some grants, found some funding, and started just making the phone calls and doing the work. And in any city, you can do this type of work.
I'm an addict myself. And if I were, and actually in 2014, 6 years before I made the 10 Demands video, I made a video and song with the New York Civil Liberties Union called Throw Away the Key, which also contained a lot of footage from police and person interactions and from prisons. But there was also a part where, I did some acting, so to speak. And it was designed to demonstrate white privilege. I'm snorting cocaine on the side of the street. And the cops just basically say hello to me and walk by. Meanwhile, a black guy is sitting on a stoop and gets a gun put in his face.
Right.
If I didn't look the way that I did, I wouldn't be here today, but given all of the things that I have done. And I think Angela Davis puts it best. She says, the category lawbreakers is far greater than the category of individuals who are deemed criminals, since almost all of us have broken the law at one time or another. Thus, if we are willing to take seriously the consequences of a racist and class-biased justice system, we will reach the conclusion that enormous numbers of people are in prison, not so much because of the crimes they may have committed, but largely because their communities have been criminalized.
Absolutely. Chad is saying thank you to all of you for the work you guys do. I very much appreciate everything you've been doing. I know, we've been DMing for a while now, me and you, Awkward, about all this type of stuff and sharing stuff out there with the world. But again, I would say the lowest hanging fruit you can get started on to get your cities moving down this path is ending cash bail. There's already a lot of structure out there for this. That is a fight that people are winning. And so start going down that path. I would also say for you two, as we end the episode, don't run away yet. I have a couple things I want to mention on this and a couple questions I have. Because for chat, we're going to be putting this up on YouTube tomorrow. As everyone knows, the Twitch rules are 24 hours after live stream before you can put it on another platform. So it'll go up tomorrow at 7 p.m. Live. And we're going to put all the links to your website, to a couple of the things that you've brought up and mentioned here. I'm going to add a link to Malden Overcoming Addiction as just, something to kind of get people's minds thinking about things they can do locally that pull people out of the pipeline before they get too far into it, before even we get the system to start making its changes, because we know how slow that process is. So before we go, do you two have anything else you want to ask of the audience here?
I want to thank you. I really appreciate the platform and everything that you do and have done. And I'm glad to see you, having been in the system yourself and, really, in the trenches of it. I mean, experiencing solitary and being in maximum security, and using your experience and what matters to you, to help amplify voices like Petrona's. It's really important. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me and making me comfortable for doing something like this for the first time.
And chat was very happy you were here. They were all very enthusiastic about it. I'm sure you'll see it on the video when it goes up tomorrow. But this was wonderful. One of the things that I want to tell chat is the next week, over the weekend, this weekend, I'm going to work hard on finding a way to make it where it's easier for them to see chat without also having to have the full stream up and going, because it's kind of weird having like multiple copies of you on your screen and whatnot. So I'll get that done so I don't have to keep relaying everything, although I still will relay it because like I want to draw attention to things. And that's great. Thanks, everyone. We are going to go to the ending credits. So thanks, chat. This will go up tomorrow. It'll have a ton of links to all the stuff that they do. Get stuff done. Lots of defunding and lots of abolition needs to happen. All right, everyone. Here we go.